Hey, what's up, guys and girls? This is OracleBot here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to synth. Where in this series, I'm going to show you how to get started using synthesizers in FL Studio from 3XOSC to next Harmless, then Citrus, and then Harmer. And after I show you those four synths, I think you'll be able to get a handle on all the synths throughout FL Studio and even third-party VSTs. So before we get started on telling you how to use 3XOSC, I think we should cover one thing before we jump right into it, which is basic waveforms. And to show you what the basic waveforms are, you have 5 of them. And the 5 basic waveforms are the side wave, which sounds like this. It's a pure tone, and you look in the EQ, it just has one harmonic, which is just the tone itself. And if I freeze the oscilloscope, which lets you view waveforms, you can see it's just a smooth up and down shape. And that's the sine wave. The next sound is a triangle wave. And this basic waveform, you can see it's like the sine wave, but instead of having curved edges, it's just straight. And then it makes like a bunch of V's or triangles. And then when you look at the EQ, it has a few more harmonics, but they're kind of quiet. And the next basic waveform is a square wave or a pulse wave. And the square wave is a pulse wave, but not all pulse waves are a square wave. And I'll show you what I mean by that after you see what the square wave looks like. And as you can see, it's just straight up, and it goes half the way, then straight down, then another half, and then up, and it repeats. That's the square wave. And when you look at the EQ, it has a lot of harmonics. It's a harmonic rich sound. And then you're like, okay, so a square wave is a pulse wave, but not all pulse waves are square waves. What do you mean by that? Well, that's like the same thing as a square is a rectangle, but not all rectangles are squares. So if I'm opening up Citrus here, but don't worry about this. I'm just showing Citrus for this one thing so it makes sense to you. You see a square wave where it's just here, halfway, down, across, and then that's a square or a pulse wave. But that's a square. For a pulse that's not a square wave, it's this. Where it's not halfway. It's not even. It's a little bit on top, most on the bottom, or most on top, and then a little bit on the bottom. That's a pulse wave. And as you can see, the pulse wave it can be anything. Really, this is a pulse wave, this is a pulse wave, this is a pulse wave. And the square is a pulse wave, but these pulse waves are not a square wave. And each one has kind of a little bit of difference in the harmonics, as you see as I move the shape around. But now you got the square wave pulse wave idea down. You're going to see that in other synthesizers, even a lot of third-party ones as well. But now that you know the square wave and pulse wave deal, we're going to move on to the next waveform, which is probably one of the most important waveforms. Well, the square wave and the next one, which is a saw wave. Which, as you can see here, it just goes straight up and down, straight up and down, and so on. And it has a lot of harmonics. And an interesting note about the square wave and saw wave is that the square wave has every other harmonic of the saw wave. So like all the odd harmonics. And what I mean by that, if you imagine the saw wave as this first harmonic being 1, the next one 2, the next one 3, and so on. The square wave has all the odd versions of that, so no 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. And to show you what I mean by that, when you switch, I'm going to be holding the note of a saw wave. I'm going to switch a square wave, and then you can see that when I turn the square wave on, that all the even harmonics of the saw wave disappear. And when I switch back to the saw wave from the square wave, that the square wave is there, but then all the harmonics in between the square wave turn on, which is the saw wave. So to demonstrate, here I go. as you can see, the square wave has every other harmonic of the saw wave. So basically, essentially all the odd harmonics. And now that you got that down, we're going to do the white noise, which is just a bunch of sounds around the entire frequency spectrum. And when you freeze the waveform, you can just see it's a mess. Because really the point of white noise is just be noise. As you can see. So now that you know what your basic waveforms are and the deal behind that, I'm going to load up 3XO to see how it starts when you open it. Alright, so now that you know basic waveforms, here's 3XOSC. You just opened it up. You can also go here in your channel rack, and you go here, add, and you select 3XOSC. You have your waveforms here that I showed you. And what I just clicked on right there is you can actually load a sample as a waveform or another waveform to use as the oscillator for 3XOSC, but you can experiment that with some other time. You can have your oscillators here you can select, as you know. This invert button, I'll show you with a sine wave. So you have the sine wave here. And this is the volume here, these two knobs. I'm gonna turn those off so you just hear this first oscillator. You have your sine wave, but then you turn invert on. All it does is it flips the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. So instead of the waveform starting here, it actually starts here, so it goes down, then up, because it literally flips the top to the bottom. That's what this invert button does here. The next, you see we have the phase offset and the detune. You have coarse, fine, and panning. What the phase offset knob does, it'll play a copy of the sine wave, so it plays 2, and what the offset does, it keeps it at the same pitch, but it'll offset the starting position of the waveform delayed compared to the original. So if I freeze this and turn this off, as you can see, the sine wave, say it starts right here, it'll make a copy of this, but then start it over here, and to show you what this looks like. You can see that one starts here and the other copy starts here, and it does that where one pan to the right, one pan to the left to create this stereo sound. As you hear, you can feel how it's stereo field compared to the mono signal, which means there's no stereo, it's just in the middle. You can hear there's a difference if you have headphones or like speakers or something like that. The next is the detune. The detune does the same as the phase offset, but instead of starting the phase in a different spot, it'll copy the waveform but change the pitch of the other one. To give it that like warbly effect where just like a less perfect tone where it just has a little more variation in the tone and it's not so static and pure. Alright, and now I'll turn that one back to normal. The next is the coarse, which changes the pitch of the waveform by semitones. A semitone is the same as a half step in musical terms. So 12 semitones is 1 octave. So here 24, you go down to 12, you just go down an octave. And the fine knob is just, if you move this all the way up on the fine knob, it's like going up 1 semitone. And in between all the way up and all the way down is a difference of 2 semitones. In the middle would be like between the 1 up and 1 down. And it gives you control of the pitch by cents. And 100 cents makes up 1 semitone. So you can see that's a lot of control for the pitch of the oscillator. And then this one is the pan of the oscillator, so it means how far left and how far right the sound is. And you can really hear that if you have headphones on or something like that. Now I'm going to switch to the saw wave because it's a harmonically rich sound. This tab right here is just, again, selecting the waveform. You can also do that in this tab. And this gives you sample controls. Like if you learn how to use like a sampler in FL, like you have a kick sample, it's basically just the same options as that. It's 3xOSC to manipulate the audio sample that you use as a waveform. But this is where the fun part of 3xOSC is, because once you mess with your operators, I just went back to Soundwave. You have envelope controls, so you can modulate volume, panning, mod X and mod Y of a filter, and pitch. And the filter here, if you want to change that, you can see there's a filter tab, and you have like low pass, band pass, high pass, and a band stop, and different types of filters to mess with. Mod X is the frequency of the filter, and mod Y is the resonance or the accentuation of wherever the filter position is. And so you can hear it's set to low pass. That's your low pass, but if you crank the resonance, accentuates wherever this is at. As you can see, as I demonstrated right there. And to do something cool, as you can see, each window besides panning has an envelope and an LFO. I'm going to start with the envelope because that's a little bit more complicated than the LFO. An LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and we'll get into that later. But to do really cool things with like the envelopes, I'm going to start with the more complicated one, which is the filter, because with the filter, you can create a shape and nothing happens. You're like, how come the filter is not doing anything? That's because you have to move the filter down, because wherever this is represents wherever this is set to. If it's all the way up, it's not going to do anything for this filter. And then once you do that, you have to turn the amount up or down. Down would be, this is wherever this is set to, and this is essentially telling it to move down. But I like to set this down, so this is 0, and turn this all the way up because it just makes sense to me when I'm working on a sound. The attack is how long it takes for whatever you're modulating to come up. And you can turn on the tempo, so it just syncs the settings of these times to like the tempo if you want it to be more rhythmical or whatever. But I usually just set this off and do it by ear, unless it's like a bass sound or something. And the attack does that. These are tension knobs down here. As you can see, the tension knob changes the shape of the attack, decay, and release. The hold is how long it'll stay at the end of the attack. The decay is how long it'll take to go from the level of the hold to the sustain. And sustain is like how loud the end of the decay is. And release is how long the sound takes to release after you let go of playing the note. But because I'm using a low pass filter, you can't really hear what it's doing. But if I go to the volume, I'll turn off this one and turn the filter back up so you can hear the sound. As you can hear, I let go of the note and there's that little sound at the end. That's the release. It's basically kind of like a reverb, or just holds on to the note after you let go. I'll turn that envelope off and turn this one back on. And because resonance follows where the frequency of the sound is, you're basically modulating this knob with the envelope. The resonance will follow the position of the the shape you create. All right, and now that we got the envelope down, I'm gonna turn it off, and I'm gonna use the LFO. To use the LFO, the first thing you gotta do is actually turn it on, because LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, so it's basically a waveform. You can't hear it because just the shape of it controls the whatever parameter you're changing. So if I turn the amount up, that's like turning the volume up on the oscillator. And speed is how basically the pitch operator. So the faster you go, the higher in pitch the oscillator is. The slower you go, the lower pitch the oscillator is. Tempo is going to link these parameters to tempo. Attack is basically like the volume at the beginning of the oscillator. I'll turn it off so you can just hear it. Delay is how long it takes for it to start. And notice that the middle of the LFO is wherever this is set to. Above it is like going above this knob, and when it goes below the middle, it's like traveling down from wherever the knob is set to. And again, resonance follows that. And you can do all these things to like mod Y, which is just resonance. So I could turn this off by just bringing the amount down. And I can go to resonance and just like maybe put an LFO on it. And you see I was using a sine wave here, but you can also use a triangle wave if you don't want like those smooth edges. And then you also have the choice of a square wave where it just tells it to go on, off, on, off. Which is really neat, and if you link that to tempo, you can create some cool rhythms. And that's all you really need to know 3xOSC. I covered basic waveforms with you. You learned about your sine wave, triangle wave, the square/pulse, the saw wave, and white noise, and I talked about sample. But then you're going to be like, Oracle, you just skipped one waveform in 3xOSC. What is this guy? Well, this is like a waveform image line just added 3xOSC. It's not like a basic waveform. They call it a rounded saw wave. I'm just going to open new 3xOSC because I messed this one up. But this 3xOSC, I turned those two guys off. The rounded saw is just a different kind of saw wave that they made up. It's just like a little bit different, as you can see. If I freeze it, you can see the shape of it compared to a saw wave. You can see they're a little bit different. Again, it's not a basic waveform, it's just something they added 3xOSC that you can mess with. But yeah, we cover basic waveforms, envelopes, the filters that you can mess with inside, the sample, and how you can use the LFO and envelope to create automations on like the filter, the volume, panning. Panning, you just get the LFO, you don't get an envelope, and pitch. And yeah, so that's how you use 3xOSC, and those are what basic waveforms are. I hope you find this helpful and that you learned a lot. You're gonna learn how to create the sounds you make in 3xOSC to come to life in the next How to Synth video, which will be post-processing, where I'll cover basic effects that are used in pretty much every synth today. And it'll help you create these sounds you can create with 3xOSC into more lively of a sound. And yeah, this is a start on How to Synth NFL. I hope this helps. If it helps, please leave a like and subscribe to help support more videos like this. If you have any questions about anything I said, please let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching. I'll see you all later.